Meet Ernst Mayr, a visionary often hailed as the Darwin of the 20th century. His remarkable 100-year life journey successfully bridged the gap between raw field observations in remote jungles and the meticulous precision of modern genetics. By weaving these disparate worlds together, Mayr played a pivotal role in creating the modern synthesis, the definitive, unified theory of evolutionary biology that continues to shape our understanding of life today. For decades, a massive intellectual rift divided biology. On one side stood the naturalists, anchored by Charles Darwin's 1859 theory of natural selection. They knew evolution happened, but lacked the genetic mechanism to explain inheritance or how species actually split. On the other side stood the 1930s geneticists, armed with precise mathematical models of gene frequencies, yet entirely unable to connect this microevolution to grand, macroevolutionary patterns. Biology was fractured. Until Ernst Mayr provided the missing link. By synthesizing field taxonomy with population genetics, he finally bridged the gap between these two isolated worlds, solving the ultimate mystery of how species truly originate. Ernst Mayr's journey spans 4 distinct chapters. It began in Germany, where a medical student transformed into an ornithologist after spotting rare red-crested poacher ducks, completing his PhD in just 16 months at age 21. Next, he braved malaria and dysentery in New Guinea and the Solomons, collecting over 3,000 bird specimens and documenting extreme geographic variation. His insights deepened in New York as a curator at the American Museum of Natural History, where he analyzed 280,000 specimens to transform field observations into evolutionary theory. Finally, at Harvard University, he directed the Museum of Comparative Zoology, cementing his legacy as a preeminent philosopher of biology who remarkably published 14 books after the age of 65. To unlock modern biology, Ernst Mayr had to overthrow thousands of years of philosophical dogma. For centuries, Western science relied on typological thinking, an essentialist view tracing back to Plato and Aristotle. It claimed species were constant, immutable archetypes, dismissing individual variation as mere flawed noise from an ideal mold. Mayr shattered this blueprint with his revolution, population thinking. He argued that constant types do not exist in the organic world. Instead, every individual is entirely unique. In Mayr's view, variation is not an error or a deviation, it is the primary biological reality. By shifting the focus to populations, he proved that this very variation provides the essential substrate upon which natural selection acts. What exactly is a species? Prior to Mayr, this species problem deeply confounded biology. Early taxonomy relied on the typological or morphological concept, looking purely at physical resemblance, which failed when dealing with identical-looking sibling species or distinct male and female forms. Others adopted a nominalistic view, dismissing species as mere human-made abstractions. In 1942, Mayr revolutionized the field with his biological species concept. He defined species as groups of actually or potentially interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated. This shifted taxonomy from appearance to behavior, beautifully explaining sexual dimorphism in sibling species. Though limited by its inability to classify asexual organisms or fossils, Mayr's concept finally reflected the objective reality of nature. How does one species multiply into two? This blueprint illustrates allopatric speciation, the cornerstone of Mayr's mechanics of multiplication. It begins with a single, continuous population sharing genes across a habitat. Next, geographic isolation strikes. A physical barrier like a rising mountain range or a new river completely severs gene flow. Cut off from one another, the separated populations face different environments, accumulating unique mutations and distinct adaptations over generations. Finally, even if the physical barrier disappears and they meet again, profound genetic divergence has already occurred. Intrinsic reproductive isolating mechanisms now prevent them from interbreeding. Where there was once a single unified lineage, two distinct species now stand. Beyond standard isolation lies a more radical process, peripatric speciation. This occurs when a tiny splinter group, peripheral isolate, is driven to the extreme edge of a species range, such as a distant island. The catalyst for dramatic change is their genetic isolation. Carrying only a small fraction of the mainland gene pool, and severed from its stabilizing gene flow, this tiny group undergoes a rapid, intense, genetic revolution. Because this evolutionary surge happens so quickly within a minute geographic pocket, intermediate forms are rarely preserved. This profound insight provided the crucial theoretical foundation for the famous 1972 theory of punctuated equilibrium, explaining why the fossil record often shows evolution in rapid spurts rather than slow, steady lines. This architectural blueprint illustrates the modern synthesis, constructed between 1937 and 1948. On the left stands the pillar of Darwinian natural selection, providing the mechanism for macroevolution and adaptation but lacking a mechanism for heredity. On the right stands Mendelian genetics, offering the mathematical rules for microevolution and gene frequencies but lacking a framework for how lineages split. The crowning keystone that holds the arch together is population thinking and geographic speciation. Championed by Ernst Mayr and Theodosius Dobzhansky, this bridging concept proved how microgenetic changes in isolated populations scale up to create macroevolutionary speciation. Formalized in Mayr's 1942 book, this intellectual consolidation built the modern house in which all evolutionary biologists now work. In 1959, a spirited debate erupted over the true target of evolution. On one side was the reductionist approach of early population geneticists, a perspective Ernst Mayr dismissively labeled beanbag genetics. This view treats the gene pool as a literal bag of colored beans, reducing evolution to mathematical calculations of shifting allele frequencies and assuming natural selection acts directly on isolated individual genes. Mayr staunchly opposed this, championing a holistic view. He argued that genes never act in isolation, their value depends entirely on the surrounding genetic background. Because natural selection cannot see a lone gene, Mayr insisted that the true target of selection is the whole, cohesive individual organism surviving and reproducing in its actual environment. For decades, the dogma of physicalism dictated that all valid sciences must ultimately reduce to the predictable, mathematical laws governing the inanimate universe. Ernst Mayr fought fiercely to overthrow this view, establishing the autonomy of biology as an independent science. While the physical world operates under universal, timeless natural laws, the living world is uniquely driven by genetic programs. These are unique, historically evolved codes resulting from millions of years of natural selection, a concept entirely alien to the physical sciences. Mayr's philosophical stance was clear: biology cannot be reduced to physics. Living systems are fundamentally historically contingent, operating under their own distinct biological frameworks that physics alone can never fully explain. In 1961, Ernst Mayr resolved a long-standing confusion by illuminating the dual nature of biological causation. He separated biology into two complementary domains. First, proximate causation answers the mechanistic, how, focused on physiology and anatomy. For example, a warbler migrates because decreasing day length triggers a hormonal release that stimulates flight. Second, ultimate causation answers the evolutionary, why, or how come, embedded in behavioral ecology. Here, the warbler migrates because, over millennia, ancestors that flew south survived winter to reproduce, cementing this genetic program via natural selection. Mayr's vital takeaway is that both explanations are 100% correct. They are entirely complementary, and a complete biological explanation fundamentally requires both. While Mayr's strict separation of proximate and ultimate causation long marginalized embryology, the extended synthesis breaks down this rigid border. Modern biology, particularly evolutionary developmental biology, EvoDevo, reveals that causation is reciprocal rather than purely linear. Developmental mechanisms, once dismissed as purely proximate, actually co-direct ultimate evolutionary trajectories. Furthermore, through niche construction, organisms are no longer viewed as passive recipients of environmental pressures. Instead, their active developmental behaviors modify their surroundings, generating entirely new selective pressures for their descendants. This continuous infinity loop weaves development, ecology, and evolution into a single unified fabric, demonstrating that how an organism grows fundamentally shapes how its species evolves. Ernst Mayr's monumental legacy is defined by a century of unparalleled scientific output. Living from 1904 to 2005, his tireless dedication yielded over 700 published scientific papers and the identification of 26 new bird species alongside 38 new orchid species. Remarkably, he authored 25 books, writing 14 after his retirement at age 65, and 5 even after passing the age of 90. This lifelong brilliance earned him the highest accolades in science, including the National Medal of Science in 1969. He also received the Balzan, International, and Crawford Prizes, prestigious honors widely recognized as the ultimate Nobel Prizes for evolutionary biologists, cementing his permanent place in scientific history. We conclude with the final word from the architect of modern biology himself. Ernst Mayr boldly reminds us that evolution is no longer just a theory for the modern author, it is an undeniable fact, as certain as the Earth revolving around the Sun. He challenges how we advance science, asserting that our true understanding of the world is achieved far more effectively through profound conceptual improvements than by the mere discovery of new facts. By transforming how we think, Mayr did not just observe nature, he took Darwin's greatest idea from 1859 and built the robust theoretical house of 1942 in which all biological science safely resides today.